What's up, guys? In this 48 Thoughts and Overview video, we'll be going over the Persecution Prospect Detachment for the Leagues of Votann. As a disclaimer, and like what I said about the Devil's Ult Shift detachment in that video, I have no experience playing this detachment, so this is purely my thoughts on reading the detachment rule, its enhancements, and the stratagems, and my overall takeaways from all that. But with that out of the way, let's get straight into it. So starting off with the detachment rule, assailed from every angle. Leagues of Votann units from your army have the following ability: Guerrilla Adepts. In your shooting phase, just after this unit is selected to shoot, this unit can use this ability. If it does, select one enemy unit, excluding monsters and vehicles. Until the end of the phase, attacks made by models in this unit can only target that enemy unit, and only if it is an eligible target. And, after resolving those attacks, if one or more of those attacks hit that enemy unit until the start of your next shooting phase, that enemy unit is assailed. This simply labels that unit for the purposes of this ability and some enhancements and stratagems. Okay. If that unit is already assailed until the start of your next shooting phase, it is also pinned. While a unit is pinned, subtract 2 inches from its movement and subtract 2 inches from charge rolls made for it. So, right off the bat, getting into the detachment rule and how it reads to me, very similarly to the tectonic fracture stratagem from Devil's Ult Shift. This is a try to slow things down, try to pin things down. Right now, this is the Hernkin Jaegers and Hernkin Pioneers oriented detachment. So this is, you're going to be running around. You're probably going to have an army list that comprises, with a lot of Jaegers, a fair bit of Pioneers, maybe some Capricus carriers and defenders, along with your Hearthkin warriors, your whatever have you. So everything being able to kind of try to pin something down and slow it down and make it harder to charge stuff, I'd say is useful, but it's also a kind of niche rule. Though with this detachment, with the sailed from every angle, it does allow for your entire army to have that kind of effect. I could definitely see a niche interaction unit with this being Chthonian Earthshakers, because they're artillery. If you have 1 or 2 units of those, and they could, so long as they at least hit stuff, pin something down and help slow things down before any of your other infantry or any of your other units start shooting at stuff, with the exception being you can't pin down or assail any monsters or vehicles. So also, depending on what army you're playing against, this detachment rule may have a lot of effectiveness or a lot of potential effect, or not a lot, because you have to be fighting Tyranids, and this Tyranid list that you're fighting has a lot of monster keyworded units, or you have to be playing against something like Knights, as an example, right, where Knights are a nothing but vehicle army. So, key takeaway from the detachment is nice to have. I think it has some play potential. We'll see where we go into the enhancements. So starting off with the enhancements is Eye for Weakness. Costs 25 points. It's for any Leagues of Votann model. Each time a model in the bearer's unit makes an attack that targets an assailed unit, add 1 to the wound roll. So, okay, cool. This is really good. This means that if you have a unit of Brokir Thunderkin, Einhir Hearthguard, or whatever have you, led by their own respective characters that can lead them, this can be really useful for making them more reliably wound things when they attack them. And because it says attack and it doesn't specify a ranged or melee attack, so long as that enemy unit has been assailed, not even pinned, you can have a unit of, let's say, like Einhir Hearthguard and Einhir Champion attached to them with Eye for Weakness, and the champion have the Eye for Weakness stratagem. They have a +1 to wound on their melee weapon attacks and their shooting, right? Like, that's fairly solid if we're looking at it from the perspective of like other shooting, units. Brokir Thunderkin with a Brokir Ironmaster attached to them, taking this enhancement. If the unit that they're shooting is already assailed, they get a +1 to wound. Depending on what weapon profile you're using for their shooting, that's just more guaranteed wounds. Or if it's the anti-vehicle, if it's you're using the Graviton Blast Cannon, which is the anti-vehicle and anti-monster weapon, you're more likely to score wounds against vehicles and monsters, but the vehicles and monsters can't get assailed, so that sort of it becomes redundant. But overall, for 25 points, I think this is an overall solid stratagem. Moving on into Writ of Acquisition for 10 points. Any Leagues of Votann character that can take enhancements can use this. But in your shooting phase, after the bear's unit has shot, you gain 1 yield point for each assailed enemy unit hit by one or more of those attacks, to a maximum of 3 yield points. Okay, so Writ of Acquisition is a means of like gaining more yield points, but based on how this is reading, you want to be basically split firing into multiple different assailed units. So definitely could be nice to get more yield points. I don't know how demanding this detachment is for going into and out of hostile acquisition and fortified takeover, but having more yield points is always nice, just because it allows you to supercharge or completely maximize the use of either certain enhancements, character / data sheet abilities, or stratagems. So more yield point acquisition is always nice, even if it does have a cap to 3. Still overall useful. It's 10 points, so it's not that expensive, but it's also not a must-have enhancement from the way I read this. The next enhancement is Surgical Saboteur for 10 points. Leagues of Votann character that can take enhancements can take this. In your shooting phase, after the bear's unit has shot, select one monster or vehicle unit hit by one or more of those attacks, and until the start of your next shooting phase, that unit is pinned. So that's nice, but I think that's kind of situationally useful, because not now, like when we look at like vehicles, there of course is the argument to be made that there are some units that count as vehicles that want to get in melee, right? First immediate thought that I think of is your select knight, chaos knight and imperial knight melee units, like a knight rampager or I believe a war dog huntsman, I believe, or carnivore. My mistake. Like those are vehicles that want to get in melee. So being able to, with this one particular unit, or character leading a unit, trying to pin them down, it slows them down. The issue though is most vehicles and some monsters tend to have a lot of movement, right? Like 10 plus inches of movement. So even if you can slow them down, you're not slowing them down by much. You're not impacting their charges technically as much. So it's not nothing, but it's not great. And then of course on the monster side of things, right? Like my mind immediately goes to Tyranids and like Chaos Demons. When looking at like Chaos Demons, most of the, at least memory serves me correctly, most of the things that are keyworded as monsters tend to be like flying things, like Be'lakor, a Lord of Change, Winged Demon Prince. Obviously, you have things like the Great Unclean One, and a on foot Demon Prince, alongside other Chaos Demons that are keyworded as monsters. But even then, it's like, for the most part of monster units, there are going to be things that fly, and so they already have like 14 inches of movement or more, or somewhere around there. So lowering that down to 12, slows them down. It's not slowing them down by much. Yes, it's negatively impacting their charge rolls. It's not impacting it that much. And then, of course, any monsters that happen to be foot slogging, and the same thing goes with vehicles. So things like dreadnoughts or carnifexes, where I believe they have 10 inches or less of movement, subtracting to their move characteristic and their charge rolls made are more impactful. But I feel as though vehicles and monsters that have 10 or less inches of movement that will be negatively affected by Surgical Saboteur are less commonplace. So likewise with Writ of Acquisition, this is a nice to have stratagem, but I don't by any means think it's necessary. But I do think that there is some play potential that can be made like around this. And then next off for the last stratagem is Nomad Strategist, or not stratagem, enhancement. My mistake. But Nomad Strategist is a 20-point cost enhancement for any Leagues of Votann character that can take enhancements. Can use it. But once per battle, at the end of your opponent's fight phase, if the bearer is on the battlefield, it can use this enhancement, and if it does, you can spend up to 4 yield points. You can then select one Hernkin unit from your army, and for every 2 yield points you just spent, select up to 1 additional Hernkin unit from your army, and you can remove those units from the battlefield and place them into strategic reserves. And you cannot select any units that are within engagement range of 1 or more enemy units, excluding assailed units. So, right off the bat, this is a neat, but I would say very expensive enhancement to allow up and down shenanigans with your pioneers and your Jaegers. The main reason why I say I think it's kind of expensive is I'm not saying like the points cost to use it is expensive. It's more of the yield point cost is potentially expensive because it's also once per battle, so it's only one opportunity that you get to up and down things compared to other abilities that work similarly, like Space Marine Scout Squads, or even like the Hernkin Pioneers. Right, they can up and down. They can go to strategic reserves or go and then come back next turn. And they're not limited to once per battle. They can just kind of do it. They just need to be either within 9 inches of the board edge or 9 inches away from an enemy unit. So I think for it being a once per battle effect, it can be really nice. It can be really useful. You could definitely do something with it, really play around with that. But it is 20 points, so it's not cheap, but not expensive. It does cost a fair bit of yield points to get the full value out of it. And from my own experience and from my own knowledge of the Votann, Hernkin Pioneers aren't necessarily the tankiest things. They aren't super durable, but they are fast. And Hernkin Jaegers are not durable at all. They can kind of die to a stiff breeze really quickly. So chances are you could probably leave the stratagem alone or enhancement alone and be perfectly fine. But moving on into the stratagems, we'll start with the one and only green stratagem for the persecution prospect, and that is Adaptable Avarice. It costs 1 command point. It happens at the start of any phase if units from your army have the Fortified Takeover effect from your army rule. The target is 1 Leagues of Votann character unit from your army. Now it says character unit, so that means character attached to a bodyguard unit or a character just by themselves. But the effect is each time you use a stratagem, you can spend any number of yield points, and once you have done so, if you have 6 or fewer yield points until the start of your next turn, units from your army have hostile acquisition instead. So, effectively, you could just force yourself into Fortified Takeover. Now, right off the bat, with this, I don't really... I'm not wowed by this. Yes, you could say, oh, well, it's not that bad because it means that instead of, in order to be in hostile acquisition, it's not 7 or less, or it's not less than 7, it's 6 or less. But it's like, okay, that doesn't functionally change anything with getting in and out of, getting into and staying in or getting out of, hostile acquisition. So this stratagem, Adaptive Avarice, just reads as kind of like a nothing burger kind of stratagem. I would say arguably like a waste of command points. If I'm wrong or if I'm not seeing something here with this stratagem, feel free to let me know in the comments how wrong or misunderstanding I am of this. But I personally just do not see the value in this stratagem. But moving on into the blue stratagems will be Frontier Momentum. Costs 1 command point. Happens during your movement phase. The target is 1 Hernkin unit from your army that has not been selected to move this phase. And the effect is until the end of the phase, if your unit advances, do not make an advance roll for it. Instead, it gets a flat 6 inches additional, added to its move characteristic. Right off the bat, This is nice. This is really good. This allows your Jaegers to further zoom up the board when they when they advance. If you have them equipped with bolt shotguns, those all have assault, so you can still do shooting and or actions. Uh, they already have a 6-inch movement, so being able to basically auto advance 6 for a total of 12 inches is nice. Hernkin Pioneers get an additional 6 inches to their movement when they advance, and if I'm not mistaken, they have 12 inches of movement, so that's 18 inches of movement. So a unit of them can zoom around, maybe get to a board edge, and then prepare to up and down, go back to the strategic reserve. I'd say if anything, the biggest criticism I can make with this stratagem is there are really only 2 units that can be affected by it. If Capricus carriers and Capricus defenders can be affected by the stratagem, then that is something neat also. But I don't know. Off the top of my head, I do not remember if they have the Hernkin keyword. But so that's really the only big criticism I have with Frontier Momentum. But other than that, being able to auto advance 6 with your Hernkin units, with your Jaegers and your Pioneers, is solid. Really good, really solid. Helps you get them into more out of the way nook and cranny places to help do secondaries or to help try to cap objectives. So solid. Second blue stratagem is Exposed Flaws. It costs 1 command point. It happens during your shooting phase. The target is 1 Hernkin unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot this phase. And the effect is, each time you use the stratagem, you can spend 2 yield points, and until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack, if you spent yield points during the use of the stratagem, and or if that attack targets an assailed unit, you can reroll the wound roll. So it's a wound reroll stratagem with a little bit of hoops to go through, depending on how you go about it, because you can either have Pioneers or Jaegers shoot something, and if that thing's already assailed, you can the stratagem can be used and all that. You get the wound rerolls. Biggest issues I'd say with this stratagem is really the prime target I would say that you'd want to use this on would be a Pioneer unit, because Pioneers compared to Jaegers just have the better guns. They have the harder hitting weapons, so being able to wound reroll those would be more effective than bolt shotguns or bolt revolvers. On top of that, just the way it can be used seems a little bit kind of like potentially hoop jumpy. Like, yes, it costs 1 command point, which is not a big deal, but it's more of like this either happens if you spend 2 yield points and or they're attacking something that's assailed. So there's a little bit of like thought that kind of needs to go into this. But other than that, nothing more to say on Exposed Flaws. This wound rerolls are always handy, even if there's a little bit of hoops to jump through to get into it. It's not wound rerolls of 1; it's just full wound rerolls. So that is, I'd say, more than makes up for the kind of hoop jumping nature of this stratagem. Now for the last blue stratagem, Ranger Tactics. It costs 1 command point. Happens during your shooting phase. The target is 1 Leagues of Votann unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot this phase. And until the effect is until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack, if that attack targets an assailed unit and or if your unit has the Hernkin keyword, you can reroll the hit roll. Now, right off the bat, I think that hit rerolls compared to wound rerolls are kind of whatever. Because typically, with at least the way I always look at this, wound rerolls are a lot more valuable than hit rerolls. But where I think that this kind of this stratagem in particular is really useful is if you are like if it's a Broke Your Thunderkin unit, right, with a like conversion beamers, just as an immediate example choice. Because they are, if they're in conversion range, and if this unit is, the unit that they're attacking is assailed thanks to the Detachment Rule, and they are targeted by the stratagem, you can reroll the hit rolls. So you're trying to fish for those 4s. You're trying to fish for those lethal hits. So I think that goes a long way. But I'd say beyond that, it's like the hit reroll effect isn't really useful for Einherjar Hearthguard with their shooting because they already reroll hit rolls of 1. Yes, but it's a full hit reroll. They hit on 3s normally. If you're in hostile acquisition and they're shooting a enemy unit on a objective marker, they get a +1 to hit, so now they're hitting on 2s if I'm not mistaken. So they're hitting on 2s, rerolling hit rolls of 1. They don't need this stratagem. If you're talking about Ironkin Steeljacks, it's a similar sort of deal, where like they're hitting on 4s, but they're hitting on 3s of, talking about hostile acquisition. So now they can reroll hit rolls of 1. It's not all that at least in my mind, not that useful. Talk about vehicles. Hecaton Land Fortress reroll hit rolls of 1, so you technically don't need full hit rerolls. And with that kind of unit, you want wound rerolls more than hit rerolls. Sagittars, same sort of thing in my mind. Hearthkin Warriors already hit reroll 1s, so they don't need full hit rerolls. So yeah, I'd say like this is a cool stratagem. This is neat, but it's definitely more useful, I'd say, for either like pioneers shooting into something or like Brook or Thunderkin shooting into an assailed unit. Going into the red stratagems, we have Claim Staker Reflex for 1 command point. Happens in your opponent's movement phase just after an enemy ends a normal, advance, or fallback move. The target of the stratagem is 1 Leagues of Votann unit from your army that isn't an artillery and vehicle unit, and that is within 9 inches of that enemy unit. And the effect is each time you use the stratagem, you can spend 2 yield points. Your unit can make a normal move up to d6 inches, and if you spent yield points during the use of the stratagem, they can instead make a normal move up to 6 inches instead, but they cannot embark into a transport as part of this move. So it's very similar to the reactive move that Hernkin Jaegers naturally have, where they can make a normal move as a reaction to an enemy ending a normal advance or fallback move near them up to d6 inches. So Claim Seeker Reflex is really useful for helping get infantry, in particular, repositioned or like out of the way. So like let's say you have a unit of Brook or Thunderkin, they end up getting moved towards or advanced towards by a enemy like unit of Chosen or Flawless Blades. You really don't want those Flawless Blades or Chosen making contact with your Thunderkin. You really don't want them to get more guaranteed charges, and they're within 9 inches of this Brook or Thunderkin unit. You spend the command point for the stratagem, you spend those 2 yield points, they can now move 6 inches away. Now, yes, oh wow, they moved 6 inches away. Oh, like that's that's not a bad charge to make. You could definitely the Flawless Blades or Chosen could definitely make that charge. But so long as the those Flawless Blades are Chosen end within 9 inches of those Brook or Thunderkin, if the Brook or Thunderkin in this example can move up to 6 inches away, and they were at the start of that normal move 8 inches away from the Chosen or Flawless Blades, well, now they can't be charged, right? Yeah, they can still be shot at by whatever pistols or bolt guns they may end up having, but that's far better than getting charged into, and that's more than worth it. And that's just one example, right? This is a useful stratagem for Einherjar Hearthguard. This is a useful stratagem for Chthonian Berserks, Hernkin Jaegers, Hernkin Pioneers, Hernkin Warriors. It's useful for all infantry. And then lastly, for stratagems, we have Dispersed Formation. Costs 1 command point. Happens during your opponent's shooting phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. The target of the stratagem is 1 Leagues of Votann infantry or Leagues of Votann mounted unit from your army that was selected as the target of one or more of the attacking unit's attacks. And the effect is, until the end of the phase, your unit has the stealth ability, and each time a range attack targets your unit, models in your unit have the benefit of cover against that attack. So right off the bat, this is a stratagem that just helps make it harder for your opponent to hit your unit that they're shooting into, and the benefit of cover worsens their AP, right, or gives you a +1 to the armor save. So off the bat, this is really really handy. Yes, there's the whole stipulation of you can only target infantry or mounted, so like with the claim staker reflex stratagem, this is something that only really affects your infantry or it affects your pioneers. But even then, this is still useful because let's just use the either like the an Ironkin Steeljack unit as an example, like in the mid board. Ironkin Steeljacks get shot up. They're already kind of hard to wound, but let's say they get shot. Okay, well now you use the stratagem. They have the stealth keyword or the stealth ability. So your opponent has a -1 to hit with whatever unit they're attacking with, or shooting with, and so the Steeljacks are less likely to get hit, and then that reduces how many hits they get taken. That potentially that's going to reduce how many potential wounds that they may take, and then any wounds that they do take, because they have the benefit of cover thanks to dispersed formation, they are more likely to make a better save and or worsen the AP of whatever weapon profile from the shooting they got shot with. So that like in that situation that's useful, and that's the same case with other units, right? With other infantry units, right? Whether that be Hearthguard, Brokir Thunderkin, Hernkin Pioneers, whatever have you. That's overall really useful. So, key takeaways from the stratagems. I'd say overall, the package deal, the stratagems, they're overall nice. With the only one I really don't like or am like more critical of because I think it's kind of useless is adaptable avarice. But otherwise, all of the stratagems have interesting play. They all do like not really benefit vehicles, which is understandable. This detachment is a more scouting like slash infantry type, infantry and mounted unit type detachment. So, of course, it's not going to really benefit your vehicles. But a key takeaway, overall thoughts of prosecution or persecution prospect. Um, I think it's neat. I think it's a detachment that maybe tries a little hard to make the Votann, who are otherwise a very honest and straightforward army, try to be a bit more tricky. And I feel as though it's kind of like a little too much, right? I'm not going to say that because of how I read this and how my misinterpretation of the rules or the enhancements or the stratagems means it's bad. I'm not going to say it's bad. I just think that for what it is, I think it does try to push the Votann in a way where they go from this rather straight, narrow, pointed thing to something that's like not that. And the Votann as an army kind of like don't do that. Or really, the only units that do that are Hernkin Jaegers and Hernkin Pioneers, because those guys either have a reactive move or like an up and down effect so long as they're within a board edge. So there is that. As I said before in the Delve Assault Shift video, I do think that any effects that slow down an enemy unit's movement and worsen their like effective charge range are cool, but they're very niche, and that is not inherently bad, but there are other effects that could be like generally speaking more useful or just handy, I'd say. Would I ever try persecution prospect in the near term future or even long term future as someone who goes back and forth between Leagues of Votann and Chaos Space Marines? Maybe, but I really don't know. Nothing about this attachment really like speaks to me. Um, whether that be the detachment rule, the enhancements, or the stratagems. And granted, I do think some of the stratagems are nice, and I kind of wish that like some like dispersed formation or claim staker reflex were present in some capacity in other detachments like Need Guard Oathband or Brandfast. But yeah, it probably won't try this at some point. But I'm not going to say it's bad. I know there are people out there who have more experience and who are a lot smarter than I can make this work or can make anything work. But yeah, but with that, guys, I want to thank you all for watching and listening. Hope you guys found this overview and my kind of thoughts and impressions on the persecution prospect detachment useful, entertaining, insightful. Um, Granted, if you really like Jaegers, if you really like Pioneers, and this is the detachment that speaks to you because you really like those biker, with you know leather jacket, overcoat, trench coat guys, that by all means do it. But it's not my cup of tea personally. But what kind of experience have you had playing with or against persecution prospect with the Leagues of Votann? Has it been good experiences, bad experiences, or have you uh, noticed the things I point out where this just seems like maybe it's a little bit too much in this one direction and it doesn't necessarily uh, work well with the Votann as an army? Not to say that it can't work, but just it's not the strong suit of the army. Feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. As always, uh, you know, liking the video, sharing it to other people, subscribing, all that go a long way to help let me know you guys enjoy this kind of content. But yeah, but with that, guys, I once again want to thank you all for watching and listening. Hope you guys are having a great time wherever you may find yourself, whether you're at work, at home, or prepping for school. Hope you're having a great time. And if not, well, I hope things get better. But until the next time, guys, I'll see you next time. Peace.